Hello there, I am Sleepy Tunes, and I am here to help you. I know you use this video to fall asleep, so please, like the video and subscribe. Also, what time are you watching, and where are you from? Now get comfortable and enjoy the tales. I've wanted to be a police officer for as long as I can remember. It was a family occupation for me. My dad and uncle had been street cops in the city, and so had my grandpa. I even think some of my ancestors were pink. I had always wanted to follow in their footsteps, but I had never liked the city. I wanted to move to the country. When I heard of a job opening in a small town upstate, I jumped at the chance to interview for it. I remember driving up the day before. I drove for almost 4 hours until I got there. It felt weird to think that people lived out there. I had rarely been out of the city, and even then, it was mostly just vacations to other cities. As I approached the town, I saw the welcome sign. Welcome to Pleasant and Palatian, 2396. It looked like every small town I had driven through. As I drove down the main street, I passed a bank, a few churches, and a drugstore. I can't really explain it, but this place immediately felt more comfortable to me than back home. I pulled into a spot in front of the police station and was surprised to see a man outside, ready to greet me. I got out of the car awkwardly. "Hey," he said, smiling brightly. I was kind of taken aback by his friendliness. He walked up to me and held his hand out. It took me a few seconds to shake it. He introduced himself as Deputy Willard. I had assumed by his old age that he was the chief of police, so this surprised me. He led me into the station. Inside there were a few older men sitting at desks and standing around. They all looked at me when I walked in, then quickly went back to their tasks. Willard brought me to the chief's office. Police Chief Palmer was at least 60 and seemed overweight. I doubted he got out of the station much. He told me to sit down and began the interview. He asked me all the standard questions about my schooling and prior experience. He asked me where I was staying in town. Not that there was much of a choice. I had only seen one motel in town. At the end of the interview, Willard, who had been there the whole time, walked behind the chief and they both looked at me seriously. "Can you start tomorrow?" Chief Palmer asked me. I was shocked. "So, you've interviewed the other candidates?" I asked. They both started chuckling. Chief Palmer spoke up. "Other candidates. This position has been open for months. You're the only applicant we've had." I didn't know what to say. I thought this would be harder. I had only packed for a few days. "Is that okay with you?" Chief Palmer interrupted my thoughts. "Yes, sir," I said, not completely thinking. Willard took me to the supply room and gave me my uniforms and badge. "Don't worry, you'll get your service weapon tomorrow," he said, cheekily. As I was about to leave, he told me that he'd be my partner, and that I should show up at 6 the next morning. I shook his hand again and left for the motel. I thought for a moment about exploring my new home, but I was so tired, and I doubted how much there was to see. I knew I would have to go back home at some point to finish packing up my things. I pulled up to the motel and brought my luggage inside. The clerk inside couldn't have been older than 20. She had blonde hair and blue eyes. I remember thinking she was too pretty to be working at a motel. "Are you the new police officer?" she asked. "Yeah," I responded. "We haven't had a new cop in a long time." "How long?" I asked. She thought for a bit. "A few years, I think." She signed me in and pointed me towards my room. That night, I got room service. The same girl from the front counter delivered it to me. As she handed me my food, I thought about a question I had been thinking about for a while now. "Do you Know why there was an opening? I asked. The smile on her face ran away. What? She asked distantly. Well, you said they haven't hired anyone in years. Why now? Well, she said, straining. I guess someone must have retired. She left abruptly, leaving me to myself. I went to bed that night with a lot of questions. Why had the clerk acted so weird when I asked about my job? I also don't remember seeing any other employees at the motel. Was she the only one? I was also curious why I had been hired. I didn't think it was likely that they wanted to expand the police force. Maybe someone had retired. I decided I would ask Willard the next day. I fell asleep. The next morning, I showered, put on my uniform, and went out into the lobby. I was surprised to see that same girl at the front desk. "Do you ever leave?" I asked. "I'm just devoted to my job," she said playfully. Any awkwardness from the night before was now gone. As I turned to leave, she said, "I'm Marlene. By the way," after nodding and leaving, I drove to the station. Again, Willard was outside to meet me. "Hey, partner," he said with gusto. I spent most of that first day meeting the other officers and doing weapons training. I had heard about smaller departments being kind of lax about it, but I was still surprised that they gave me my service pistol after only a few hours. The way Willard put it, I wasn't officially allowed to have it, so he told me not to use it unless I absolutely had to. The other officers were as plain and old as they looked. None of them seemed very suited for work in the field, but Willard assured me that there wasn't much to worry about in the sleepy town at the end of the day. They put me on file sorting duty. It wasn't what I would have liked to do, but I was the new guy, so I accepted it. I sat down in a supply room with cardboard boxes all around me. These clearly hadn't been looked at in years. As I dug through them, I found that there was basically no organization to them at all. It was a complete mess. Maybe, I thought, this would be a good way to learn about the town. I had been in that room for a few hours, sorting the papers into piles based on crime and time period. The vast majority of them were minor misdemeanors, like trespassing and vandalism. In fact, there were a lot less files than I initially thought. According to these records, the town only had a few crimes every year. No wonder the force was so small. There was barely anything to police. I went through all the boxes and stood up to leave, but then I noticed one I had missed. It was in the corner of the room, close to the door. Instead of cardboard, this was a wooden crate. I could see several papers sticking out of it. Willard had told me to sort all of the papers in the room. So with a sigh, I walked over and picked up the box and set it on the table. I reached in and took out one of the files. I opened it curiously and saw the face of a little girl. It read, "Mary Preston missing since April 3rd, 1979. It said that she had been last seen in her backyard and had vanished without a trace. It was sad, sure, but I was going to find a missing KID file at some point. I closed it and put it off to the side. It would be the start of the missing kid pile. I reached into the box and got another file. I opened it up and was surprised to see another child. This one, a boy. Ben Nichols missing since January 19th, 1987. That's weird, I thought as I put this one on top of the other. I hadn't seen any missing persons cases in any of the other boxes, but I had just drawn 2 in a row. I shrugged and got a third file. It was also a missing kid. I went through 5 or 6 other files and they were all missing children, one dating back to 1923. I went through all of them and they were all the same. Just dozens of files, all of missing children in the area. I opened one. It said, Savannah Gerber missing since August 13th, 2022. That was less than 3 years ago. I wondered if any of these children had been found. It didn't look like any of the files had been updated. I had only checked about half of the box, but I didn't want to keep going. I put them all back and set the box back where I had found it. It just seemed so weird that a town with such a low crime rate had so many missing persons cases. I put all the other files back into their boxes, now sorted, and left the room. It was 5:15, and Willard told me to go home a bit early. I would go out in the field the next day, he said. I drove back to the motel that night, and Marlene was still at the front desk. I was walking past when she stopped me. "What are you doing tonight?" she asked. "I don't know," I said. "Wanna go out?" I was taken aback. I had only just met this girl, but I reasoned that it would do me well to forget the day. "Sure." I said, "Where?" She said she knew a place and that she could drive. I got in her car and she drove us to a bar on Main Street. The inside was full of locals, who all turned to me in curiosity. We sat down at the bar and got some drinks. She began to talk. "So, where are you from?" I told her. "Why'd you come out here?" she asked playfully. "I just wanted to get away." "Well, this is definitely a way," she joked, who has spent the next few hours telling stories and drinking. It was nice to forget those files in the company of a beautiful woman, but eventually thoughts of them crept back. I decided to ask her about it. "So, I understand we have an issue with missing kids here." She went silent and made that same face she had the night before. She recovered with a smile. "Well, I guess it happens every now and then. It's just weird," I continued, "how the town has such a low crime rate but so many missing people." "Yeah, well," she looked concerned, "the woods around here are pretty extensive. My guess is they wander in there and get lost." I could tell by her body language that she wanted to change the subject. We talked for a while longer. At this point, I had stopped drinking. I had to get up early, but she was still knocking them back. "Don't you have to work tomorrow?" I asked. "Yeah." "So," she said, before she slammed back another shot. In a few more minutes, she began slurring her words. At this point, she began saying some weird stuff. "Yeah, no, they're fine," she mumbled, out of nowhere. "What?" I asked. "Those kids, they're fine." "What do you mean they're fine?" She looked me in the eyes. "Some things happen for a reason. What reason is that?" She said, "You'll know, Marlene." I said, "That's not funny." "Huh," she burped. "I know. I'm dead serious." She was obviously making fun of me now. I looked at my watch and said it was getting late and that I would have to go. She offered to drive me, but I said no and walked back to the motel. I didn't know what to think. I woke up with a headache and I was almost late to the station. Again, Willard was outside, chipper as ever. He said that we were going out on patrol. I knew this would be a big part of the job, but I didn't expect to do it so soon. Within a few minutes, we were in an old police cruiser going down Main Street. "This is the bulk of the job," said Willard. "This and paperwork, of course." My mind flashed back to the missing persons files. I had almost forgotten them. Willard drove along, waving at pedestrians as we went. "This here is heaven on earth," he said idealistically. I wanted to believe him. Suddenly, the radio crackled to life. A voice came on, "Cruiser B, we got a dog attack on Chester and Main." "Roger," said Willard. He turned to me, ready for some action. I nodded nervously as Willard jerked the car into a U-turn and put on the siren. We only had 2 drive for a few hundred feet to get there. We pulled up to a house with a few people in the front. They looked pretty shaken up and thankful to see us. We got out and one man came up to us. "Thank God you're here, officer. My son got bit." I looked over to the curb and I saw a young boy with a bloody hand. I heard another siren as the town's only ambulance pulled up. As the paramedics got out and took care of the kid, Willard said we should find the dog. The people said the dog ran down the street, so that's where we went. It didn't take long for us to find it. It was a massive dog, probably husky. It wasn't moving. I looked closer and could see that its fur was matted and dirty, and it looked malnourished. Probably a stray, I thought. Willard bent down and looked for a pulse, but he couldn't find one. It was dead. Big guy was probably hungry, huh? Willard joked as we got back on the main street. I didn't say anything. I was still processing what I had seen. That poor kid. We had stopped for lunch at a fast food place. Willard was eating gleefully as if he hadn't just seen what he had. He looked over and noticed that I wasn't eating. "Something got ya down, son?" He pried. I didn't answer, but he knew what was wrong. "Listen, the kid is fine. You'll get used to this sort of thing, trust me." I nodded and started eating. We had almost finished when I said that I would have to go back home at some point. Willard looked at me incredulously. "What do you mean?" "Well, I gotta get all my things. We have stores here, yay, no." I pushed harder. "I can't just leave everything." He relented. "Okay, well, you can't go until this weekend." "Great," I thought sarcastically. I had already ran out of clean clothes, and I had to wait even longer. We were almost done for the day, driving around town, when we got another call on the radio. What the voice said made my blood turn to ice. A missing child. I wanted to jump out of the car. Even Willard, usually joking, turned serious as he raced to the address. As we got closer, I realized where we were going. We pulled up to that same house, with that same man out front, this time more distraught. We got out, and he begged us to find his son. This was the same boy who had been bitten only a few hours before. While Willard called for backup and reassured the parents, I thought hard about where this kid was. The parents said he was playing at the park with his friends when he went around the back of a tree to go pee. He never came back, and they couldn't find him. They had gone home and their parents had told this kid's parents. After another squad car showed up, I went over to Willard and said, "So, are we going to the park?" He turned to me. "What?" "Well, we should go to where he was last." Willard turned to me. "Seriously, we have orders to stay here and take witness statements." I tried to object, but he cut me off. I stayed there and interviewed some of the kids. It just didn't make sense. I knew that park was right next to the forest. The way I saw it, this boy was probably in those woods, lost. We were there for a few hours, until the sun was about to go down. Willard said we should get the statements back to the station, and we drove there. I was pretty shaken up at this point, and Willard could see that. He told me to go home and get some rest. I didn't want to go, but I relented. I went outside and sat in my car, thinking. I wanted to go back to the motel and drive home, but I couldn't. I had to go to that park. I sighed and drove towards the outskirts of town. I pulled up and got out. I remember thinking that it seemed weird to put a park there. I walked across the sand pit towards the woods. There was a giant oak tree, which I assumed was where the kid had gone. I walked behind it and immediately saw a red scarf. I was furious. This was evidence that the force didn't know about, because no one had come out there. I looked up at the forest in front of me. I wasn't scared of the dark, but it creeped me out. I could barely see into the darkness, even though there was almost a full moon. I got an urge to run back, but fought it. Instead, I walked slowly into the forest. Even in the dark, I saw something on a tree about 20 feet away. I crept towards it, twigs snapping under my feet. When I got to it, I saw that it was a small green jacket. I remembered that boy wearing this exact same jacket. I knew he was close. I decided I had to call out. I steadied myself and yelled out, "Hey, are you out here, kid?" I got no response, except for the cold wind blowing in my face. I had almost turned back when I heard a gut-wrenching sound. A high-pitched screaming sound emanated from the forest. It sounded like a child in pain. I started running towards it when a hand grabbed me. I whipped around and saw Willard. "Get back," he yelled. I tried to run into the woods, but he pulled me back all the way to the sandpit, where we both collapsed. "What are you doing?" I yelled. "You can't stop it. It's not your place." "What?" The screaming stopped, along with any other forest noise. I got up and prepared myself to run back in. Willard stopped me. "My last partner." I turned around in surprise. He continued, "My last partner did that. He ran in after a kid and never came out." I couldn't even register what I was hearing. "What do you mean?" "His name was Brian. Don't go in there or you'll die." I walked up to him as he sat there in the sand. I exploded on him. "What the fuck is happening here?" He tried to talk, but couldn't find words. "I saw those files, Willard. How many missing kids do you have here? Why are you not investigating them?" Willard got up. "It's not like that," he shouted. "Isn't it?" I yelled louder. He got in my face. "No. There's something in these woods, son. Every year, it takes an offering. An offering? What the fuck are you talking about?" "Those missing children, that's what I'm talking about. Whatever's in there has to be appeased, or all hell breaks loose. There's no point investigating." He sat back down and wept. My anger had turned into fear. What the hell was this? I looked down at him and said, "I'm leaving." I took my pistol out of my holster and dropped it. I walked back to my car as he yelled for me to stop. I didn't listen. I started my car and drove off, tears streaming down my face. I sped to the motel and got out without turning off my car. I burst inside, running past the front desk, where Marlene stood. I ignored her and walked briskly to my room. I began to pack my things, just shoving things into my suitcase haphazardly. There was a knock at the door. Marlene's voice came from the other side. "Are you okay?" I didn't answer. The door opened. Marlene walked in, nervously, as I continued to pack. "What are you doing?" she asked. "I'm leaving," I answered without looking at her. She walked up to me and grabbed my hands, getting close to me. "Don't leave," she said softly, kissing my face. "Stay here with me." She tried to guide my hands to her chest, but I pushed her away. "Get off me." "Why?" she asked. "You knew, didn't you?" "What do you mean? Those fucking missing kids. You knew about them. You knew what's been happening too." "Them I don't," she started. I cut her off. "Shut up." I had finished packing. "I'm leaving this shithole, and I'm not coming back." She started crying. I grabbed my suitcase and turned to go. As I went to go past her, she grabbed my wrist. I looked down and saw that she had a knife. She thrust it forward, but I leaped back and punched her in the throat. She dropped the knife, and I kicked it away. I saw that she wasn't any threat to me anymore, so I gave her one last look and ran down the hall outside. I raced out to my car and sped out of the parking lot towards home. As I was driving down Main Street, a siren and flashing lights ignited behind me. I was being pulled over. I couldn't see who was driving it, but instinct told me not to stop. It followed me down Main Street, past the welcome sign. I began to drive faster, and so did the cop car. There were no other cars in sight as I sped through the night. I didn't know if my shitty car could outrun this guy for long. He was probably a few inches behind me. I saw a side road coming up, and I yanked my wheel towards it. The cop car raced past, and I turned off my lights. I drove down a gravel road in the darkness, trying to put as much distance between me and the cop car as I could, while doing my best not to run off the road. I turned off to an even smaller road. I went a few hundred feet down it and saw the cruiser race by. I hoped like hell that he hadn't seen me. It turned around and drove back to the first gravel road, then back to the highway. I didn't see him anywhere. I flipped my lights back on and drove as fast as I could. I didn't see the cop car again. I had lost him. I drove straight home that night without sleeping. The whole time, I thought I would see the cop car burst out from a side road or something, but I never did. I didn't feel safe until I got to the city. I got to my apartment building, ran upstairs, and collapsed on my bed. I'm writing this about a week later. I know it sounds unbelievable, but I swear it's all true. Pleasanton is a real place, but I don't recommend anyone go there. I took a job with the city police force, not what I prefer, but it's a whole lot better than my last job. I tried to help those kids, believe me. Shortly after arriving back home, I called the FBI and tried to tell them about the number of missing kids. The guy I talked to didn't take it seriously at all. He said it didn't justify FBI involvement, and that it definitely wouldn't happen without cooperation from the local PD. Fat chance of that, I thought. When I mentioned the screaming from the woods, I completely lost him. He told me it was probably an animal of some kind, but I know what I heard. I don't know what took the children, and it terrifies me to imagine it. I don't know what role Marlene or any of the rest of the town plays in it. I don't know why that dog died, and how that ties to the entity in the woods. I'm a coward for leaving, I know, but I have no doubt that if I had pulled over that night, I would be dead. They obviously don't want this information to get out, but I had to tell it. This was the last thing I could think of doing to try to help those kids. I'm putting this out there in the hope that someone knows something about this town or knows who to contact. I just hope the town of Pleasanton is done with me. It started on a Sunday. I was standing in my kitchen, bone tired from having worked a night shift, and had just cracked open a fresh box of cereal when I heard this ding of something heavy falling into the bowl. I looked down to see a tiny green, glow-in-the-dark toy alien staring back at me. It was shrink-wrapped for hygiene, but that was beside the point. I've been eating the same knockoff brand of cornflakes for years now, mainly because it's cheap, and also because it's apparently healthier than all the other sugar-packed crap, but not once had I found a surprise gift inside. That was the kind of thing you expect to leave behind with your tweens, like graduating from a Happy Meal to a Big Mac. I checked the box of cereal and, sure enough, they weren't running some kind of strange alien-themed promo to boost sales. Working nights makes you slightly delirious. And I remembered unwrapping the alien with a manic grin before popping it down on my game's console like some kind of bug-eyed mascot. I picked up my controller to play until I got tired, munching on the cereal as I went and didn't think much more of it. After all, it was easy to imagine the alien accidentally falling from one of the other manufacturing lines during the packaging process, and it was just a harmless toy. If only it had stayed that way. I did another week of work, finished off the box of cereal, and must have picked up another when I went shopping because I didn't notice the next surprise gift until I sat down to eat and heard the packet rustle. Against my spoon, I fished out the see-through package to find a single condom inside and sat bolt upright. Thankfully, it looked unused, but it put me off my cereal straight away. "The fuck?" I said, binning off the rest of the bowl and rinsing my mouth out for good measure. Feeling queasy, I stared at my latest surprise gift on the counter for a while, wondering what the hell was going on. What kind of factory packages both cereal and condoms, let alone single ones? The only other time I'd seen them in the wild like that had been in nightclub men's rooms, i.e. the kind you buy from a machine for rip-off prices because you think you're just about to get lucky, hoping to find some answers. I tried calling the hotline on the cereal box, but no one picked up. Somehow, this didn't seem surprising. I mean, who actually called the numbers on these things? There was also an email address, so I pinged them a message and got a mailer demon error, which seemed par for the course. Reaching a dead end, I decided I'd speak to the store manager when I was next in, assuming I hadn't forgotten by then. Given the image of that condom sitting on my spoon was pretty much scarred onto my brain, at that point I doubted I'd forget anytime soon. Sure enough, the next time I rocked up to the superstore, I made a beeline for the manager's office before I'd even so much as glimpsed the cereal aisle. I passed a few familiar faces on the way, which, given how long I'd lived in the area, was hardly surprising. Hell, the neighbor's kid, a family friend, and a guy from the same class year as me all worked in this store, the latter of which helped me track down their boss. "You wanted to speak to me, sir?" she asked. "Yeah." She took me into her dingy office and I tried my best to explain the situation to her without sounding like a conspiracy theorist. I showed her both the toy alien and the condom, and to her credit, she seemed to believe me, or at least have one hell of a good poker face. And the alien was wrapped too. "Well, yeah," I replied, now wishing I hadn't opened it. After the condom, the alien didn't seem quite as funny anymore. Has anyone else reported anything like this? Not that I'm aware of. I mean, I could check with the other stores and maybe reach out to our suppliers, just in case. "Yeah, okay. In the meantime, maybe it's best you tried another brand instead." Sure. I left her office feeling like I was making a mountain out of a molehill. I guess in the grand scheme of things, I was just complaining about getting free stuff, but either way, the vibe was all wrong. It felt sinister somehow, like someone was trying to send a message. Anyway, I followed the manager's advice and decided to switch cereal just to be safe. They had some kind of off-brand Cap'n Crunch on special offer. It was the multicolored type, and there was one box left, so I figured why not. I could do with a bit of nostalgia. I vividly remember opening that box as soon as I got home. I wasn't even hungry, more just curious, or perhaps even paranoid at that point. What if it wasn't just that knockoff cornflakes brand after all? I prized up the cardboard top and pulled open the bag of cereal to find only a sea of colored cereal chunks. No surprise gift this time. To be sure, I dug a hand inside the bag but couldn't feel or hear any crappy plastic-wrapped freebies, so figured I was in the clear. I closed up the box and got on with the rest of my day, feeling slightly relieved. I didn't notice my hand was bleeding until after I'd finished lugging a load of boxes around at work, and figured I'd just picked up a paper cut from those instead. I didn't put two and two together until that night when I got home, poured out a bowl of cereal, took a bite, and felt my cereal bite back. Hard, you know that moment. Right after taking a bite of food, when your eyes tell your brain it's going to be soft, but then your teeth and jaw get blindsided by something solid and completely unexpected, like getting the proverbial rug pulled out from under your feet. I felt that, but times 100. My mouth seemed to explode with sharp pinpricks of pain. I jolted forward, dropping my spoon, and watched in disbelief as blood dripped down from my mouth into the milk of the cereal bowl. I rushed to the bathroom and spat the mouthful into the sink. Something small and metallic hit the basin, and I stared in horror at the thumbtacks hiding amongst the chunks of half-chewed cereal. There were 3 of them, and they were multicolored, as if to blend in. Scared, shitless, I looked in the mirror and saw a 4th sticking into my tongue. GRGH. I fished it out with my fingers and started to panic. The blood tasted warm and metallic in my mouth. I rinsed and I rinsed, but it just kept flowing like a river. I spied the mouthwash on the side and kept putting it off because I knew it'd sting like a bitch, but eventually I caved. I had to clean the cut somehow. My mouth felt on fire as I swilled it out before texting my older brother to take me to hospital. It must have really freaked him out because he was over in minutes and looked as white as a sheet. I sat with a makeshift spit bucket under my chin the whole drive as he barraged me with questions. But I could barely talk, my tongue was so numb. All I could think about was what if the tacks had been laced with some kind of poison or disease. Thankfully, after grilling me for details at the hospital, they tested me, and apart from the pain, I was fine. It wasn't until I got discharged from the ER later that day and my brother drove me home that I realized how badly the cereal had been sabotaged. I watched as he poured out the rest of the box onto the counter and found a handful more of the multicolored thumbtacks, as well as a small, empty plastic packet at the bottom with 1 more inside. "Look," he said, holding up the tiny see-through bag and pointing to the slice across the top. "Whoever put this in must-have cut the top first with scissors or something. Who does that kind of thing? You're lucky you didn't accidentally swallow them." I nearly heaved at how close I'd come to doing just that. I think I'm put off eating cereal for life now, but a part of me still wants to know. What lunatic did this, and why? Are they targeting me, or am I just some unlucky rando? I almost feel scared to ask, but have any of you guys found any surprise gifts in your cereal lately? I swear to God, if any of you comment saying this story is now serialized, I'm not posting again. Honestly, I've heard enough cereal puns this week to last me a lifetime. Anyway, things have gotten even weirder since my last post. For those wondering, yes, I did report my thumbtack incident to the knockoff brand and they replied the next day. They apologized profusely, gave me a PO box to send the packaging to, and launched a detailed internal investigation. They got back to me a week later, saying they'd found 2 different types of adhesive on the end tabs of the box and the inner wrapper, suggesting the product had become compromised and resealed, somewhere between leaving the factory line and hitting the store shelf. They said they've since sent a memo out warning their suppliers and issued a product recall. So hopefully you guys won't be accidentally eating that stuff anytime soon. The next part of their email was basically legal mumbo jumbo covering their asses before saying, although they weren't technically at fault, due to the packaging being compromised outside their facility. As a gesture of goodwill, they'd like to offer me $200 worth of grocery vouchers and also a lifetime supply of their cereal. I turned down the cereal for obvious reasons, but took the vouchers, mainly because I needed them to help fund my own internal investigation. After my mouth had fully healed, I went back to the superstore to try to get back into a routine, but also to gather more evidence. I was a lot more wary as I walked the aisles, second-guessing anyone who said hello or who so much as glanced my way. Even if they didn't work there, they could still be the one behind the evil surprise gifts. I stayed in the store for nearly an hour, not really adding much to my basket and mostly just scoping the place out. I did a circuit of the cereal aisle at least 4 times, trying to memorize which boxes were there when I'd first entered the store and whether any new boxes had somehow made their way onto the shelves, since perhaps with a special surprise inside. As far as I could tell, cereal had only either left the shelves or moved slightly due to other customers rather than any members of staff. On my final lap, I picked up the samples for my experiment, consisting of 6 boxes of cereal in total, 2 from each available brand, 1 from the front of the shelf and 1 from the very back. My theory was that whoever was targeting me was placing the spiked box or boxes near the front of the shelves whenever they saw me coming, in the hopes I'd bite. Perhaps if I gathered enough of their surprise gifts, I could pass them along to the police as evidence and either get them, or the store manager, assuming it wasn't them all along, to cross-check the contaminated packages against any in-store CCTV. Was glad to see the off-brand Cap'n Crunch was no longer on the shelves due to the recall, and used some of the vouchers the manufacturers had gifted me to pay for my shopping before heading home. As soon as I got in, I dumped the rest of the bags and put on some safety gloves and glasses I'd borrowed from work before opening any of the cereal. After what had happened with the thumbtacks, I wasn't taking any chances. My heart was racing, but I forced myself to work slowly and methodically. The first box was clean, and so too was the second, but that didn't calm my nerves. It wasn't until I opened the final box and emptied the contents onto the surface to find nothing but chunks of cereal that I felt my fear deflate into a strange sense of disappointment. I muttered, finally tugging the safety specs off. All 6 boxes were completely fine. My experiment was a dud, and I had no new evidence to pass along. I felt my stomach growl at the sight of the sea of cereal in front of me, but forced myself to grab something else to eat instead whilst I worked out what to do next. Maybe now I'd reported them. Whoever had been spiking the cereal had decided to lay low for a while. I'd just tugged the plastic clip off the loaf of bread and watched the first slice fall over when I realized my mistake. They had been one step ahead of me the whole time. There, running right through the loaf of sliced bread, was a rectangular hollowed-out hole, and inside it sat 2 new surprise gifts, both wrapped inside hygiene, sealed, see-through packets, of course. After the thumbtacks, they must have figured I'd be put off cereal and would eat something else instead. Leaving the gloves on, I carefully pulled out the surprise packets. One was a box of painkillers, and the other was a small get-well soon card with an overly smiley face on. Somehow, the card creeped me out more than the single condom had done. It was the fact they knew they'd caused me harm with the thumbtacks, and I could tell the card was insincere. Sure enough, I carefully peeled open the wrapping on the card in the hopes of finding some kind of handwriting to identify them with, but it was blank. They just wanted me to know they were watching. Feeling dumb, and slightly angry. I pulled out a bin bag and put the bread, painkillers, and card inside to try to preserve my new evidence. Surely, I had enough to go to the police with now. Realizing I now needed to get a new loaf of bread, I decided to walk to the nearby convenience store instead to clear my head. I grabbed another pack of sliced whiten to prove a point to myself. One more box of cereal. I figured if a surprise gift was inside either of them too, then the problem wasn't just at that one superstore after all, and was far bigger and more surreal than I'd first thought. Thankfully, both bread and cereal were fine, and I felt some sense of balance return to my small world. Feeling like I had more of a handle on the problem now, I made myself a sandwich and headed off to work. I spent the first half of my shift in a sour mood, not knowing what to make of anything or who to trust anymore. Despite my lunch having been tucked safely away in my locker, I still picked apart my sandwich in my break before eating it on the off chance it had somehow been spiked whilst I'd been away. "You okay, man?" my workmate asked as he caught me staring at the contents of my sandwich splayed out in front of me. "Yeah, just tired. You and me both, pal. I tell ya, these night shifts, they fuck with your head." I grunted and carried on with my shift, feeling like a bug in a petri dish. How could someone at that store know my routine so well they could guess exactly what I'd buy before I even knew? Was I really that predictable? I spent the rest of my shift trying to guess which of the superstore staff could possibly hold a grudge against me, but ultimately drew a blank. It wasn't until I clocked out that I realized I'd been so freaked out by the blank "Get well soon" card that I hadn't even opened the second surprise gift from earlier, the box of painkillers. As soon as I got back, I went straight to the kitchen to fish out the packet from the bin bag. I tore it open, half thinking it'd be just a pack of pills and another dead end, only to find something far stranger. Winner. The foil wrapper tucked inside the pillbox screamed. Fearing the worst, I put the safety gloves and glasses back on and carefully opened it to find a cinema ticket. I had to read the ticket at least 3 times to make sense of it. It seemed to be to a showing of a film called 2:30, only it was showing at 9:10 in the morning, i.e. within the next hour. I quickly Googled the name of the cinema and realized it was on the other side of town. Suddenly, I not only felt like a bug inside a petri dish, but could almost feel the gigantic magnifying glass hanging over my head. Was someone just watching me, or about to burn me alive? Knowing my window for answers would close if I didn't leave now. I grabbed my coat and headed out the door. The cinema was dead, which, considering it was first thing in the morning in the middle of the week, was hardly a surprise. The dead-eyed attendant checked my ticket and pointed me to the screen at the end of the hall with a zombie-like grunt. I didn't bother asking if they'd heard of the film 2:30 before, even though I sure as hell hadn't. I was the only one inside the screen, but chose a seat in the middle of the room. Yet, at the end of a row, figuring I could make a quick getaway if I needed to. I sat through the obligatory barrage of adverts and cell phone warnings before finally the movie started. There was no credit sequence, no musical score, just a straight cut to the title card, to 30, followed by a grainy view of someone's basement. There were tools on the walls and a rickety chair with someone frail and unconscious tied to it. Whoever was holding the camera panned it up to show a pair of rusty pliers inside a gloved hand. There was no sound, but I could tell what was about to go down before the unseen assailant even stepped towards their victim. "Oh Christ," I moaned aloud, as it finally dawned on me what the title of the film actually meant, 2:30, before glancing around to spot a guy sitting 2 rows behind me. wearing a hoodie and staring straight at me. The drawstrings on his hood were pulled tight across his face, like he was going for a run in the middle of winter, leaving a black hole where his face should have been. I didn't know if the film I'd been led here to see was some budget, found footage, horror, or a genuine snuff film. But in that moment, I forgot about the damn film, as real horror was 2 rows behind me. The foyer was empty, the popcorn stand not even switched on, it was so early. I power walked to the exit and jogged down the steps before taking off down the street. It was light outside, making me feel slightly safer, so I risked a glance over my shoulder, yet the sight of the guy in the black hoodie barreling down the cinema steps made me whisk back around. He was wearing matching black joggers and sneakers, and was built like he'd spent the past 2 decades in the gym. I started sprinting, but I didn't stand a chance. I got a stitch before I reached the car park, and felt his huge hand yank on the collar of my coat before I reached my car. He spun me around and shoved me against the side of a white van. For one terrifying moment, I thought he was about to abduct me, but he just shouted in my face instead, making me flinch. "Are you the guy?" "What?" I squealed. "The guy that's been hiding stuff in my whey powder." "No." "Then why were you running?" "I thought that was you. It's been happening to me too." Shaking like a leaf, I pulled out the cinema ticket from my pocket. "Look, I got a ticket to that showing." "What the hell was that movie, dude?" "I dunno, you tell me." I finally opened my eyes and stopped cowering enough to look at him. He looked in his 40s, rough-shaven and haggard. Fuck. They're in my fucking head, man, I swear. He let me go then and stormed off, looking dazed. I stood there, doubled over, trying to catch my breath for a good few minutes after that. When I finally calmed down, I looked around the car park to check no more gym ninjas were trying to jump me before heading back home to gather my thoughts. I was too rattled to sleep, so I decided to make a coffee in the hopes of getting some kind of brainwave. I opened the coffee canister, dug in the teaspoon, and instantly regretted it. As soon as I heard the same telltale crunch of plastic wrapper that had haunted my life for the past month, I dropped the canister like a live wire. The coffee granules scattered over the floor, but the surprise packet somehow landed on my foot. The thing inside was small, white, and looked just like a tooth. Even from this distance, I could see the flecks of blood on it, at the same time as I figured out what the hell was on my foot. I also realized whoever had put the tooth inside the coffee canister must have broken into my apartment and could still be here in a blind panic. I kicked the tooth away and ran out of the apartment. I banged on my neighbor's door until they let me in, and together we called the cops. They arrived within the hour, and I told them everything, starting from the very beginning. With the toy alien, they recovered the shrink-wrapped tooth from my apartment, and a few hours later, I was in a police interview room being grilled by 2 of their detectives. Both were middle-aged, pot-bellied and balding, and I could tell neither were taking me seriously. "So, you're telling me someone knew in advance exactly what box of cereal you were going to buy out of the hundreds on the shelves, planted some thumbtacks inside them, and you ate them by accident?" "Yes." "And someone working at the store is responsible for targeting you and the individual you encountered earlier?" "Yes." "Someone who must know our routines?" "And who might that be?" "I dunno, maybe my old classmate, or maybe even the store manager." "Oh yeah, how come?" "Look, it must be someone who works at the store and has some kind of connection to that cinema. I mean, how else could they have played that film otherwise? We've checked with the cinema and that screen was closed for maintenance today." "Then how do you explain the ticket?" Surely that's evidence enough, right there. Evidence. You've compromised by opening. The other detective chimed in, arms folded. Is the tooth real? I asked them. We can't comment on that. So it is then, I guessed. This is some kind of serial killer, isn't it? The partner scoffed. More like a serial killer, right? The other facepalmed. Really, Jerry? What? Jerry shrugged. The other, sterner detective turned back to me and said, Look, if you find something else, here's my card. In the meantime, stay safe, and maybe skip breakfast for now. No kidding. That interview had been 2 days ago, and a cop car is still parked outside my apartment. I don't know if it's standard procedure, and they're just keeping me safe, or if they're actually staking me out. After all, I must be a suspect to end up so tied up in all of this mess. My paranoia is spiraling, and I'm eating nothing but tinned food. I'm scared I'm starting to become like that sketchy guy in the hoodie. I didn't notice until I got home, but the detective who gave me his card is called Detective Winner, which reminded me of the winner. Wrapper inside that box of painkillers. That's just got to be a coincidence, right? P.S. A buttload of that knockoff cereal just arrived, even though I specifically said I didn't want a lifetime's supply. I'm talking 50 boxes. My hallway is full of the stuff. What am I supposed to do with all of it? Send it back? What if more comes next month? PPSA, second delivery just came. An overnight fast-tracked parcel, the heavy-duty black plastic-wrapped kind with no return. Address. I opened it up, and it's full of creepy, pre-packaged surprise gifts. Everything from small toys to unused single rounds of 9mm ammunition to razor blades. There was another tinfoil winner, wrapper inside, just like in the painkiller box. I've just ripped it open, and all it says on the piece of paper inside is you know the drill. Shit, I feel like I'm being framed, or maybe ... initiated. What the hell do I do? There are places along rivers of unmatched beauty, heliographs of sun-borrowed magic undulating in tendrils of light. The river will kiss your cheek. The river will lull you to sleep. Like us, rivers can dance with movement before turning suddenly stagnant. Like us, river channels are cut and made through the inertia of time. There exists both beauty and darkness, dispersed with each thrust of oar to water. There are places of life and death and even terror that can only be accessed from the hard seat of a canoe. Or so I believed, as I glided along that solemn stretch of thick pine groves. Acrid water massaging metal, my weathered hands twisted into a jastroke, flushing the recent past behind me with each forward thrust. The river was shallow from a persistent draft that had impacted the region all throughout the summer, and now, into late September, I had spent the past year summer drinking regardless of season. Watching my favorite baseball team blow their opportunities, I could relate, and most of all, communing with the recently departed. I did not yet know that on this night, my mad river journey would culminate in my discovery of a dead body, which would alter and imperil what little I had left. Along the embankment, snapper turtles, sunbathed atop icebergs of smooth riverstone, necks craned to the wind, their tiny Jurassic features blanched and muted by the surrounding green tundra of algae and native vegetation. Overhead, the sun dipped ever lower, and an autumnal breeze kicked up an almost briny scent from the placid water. Had the waterway turned brackish here? Was there some deep tidal pool at play, below even the river itself, cutting from sediment, bedrock straight to the eastern seaboard? I could not say certainty about anything, was no longer my companion. Each oar thrust cut through leafy debris, just as surely as each rowing motion cut a sharp pain in my middle-aged shoulders and forearms. My head throbbed, and so did my bleeding hemorrhoids. An occupational hazard, even if this visiting of the dead was more of an avocation than a vocation, strictly speaking. And besides, those issues first arose from my many years in a hard seat, writing softballs about local politics. Now, a former vocation, though not by my choice. So it goes. Our bodies often owe outstanding debts to jobs that have long ceased paying our salary. In truth, I felt conflicted about being a journalist, even in the best of times. Resented being told what to write, resented being tethered to the whims of editors and the local narrative. Now, I researched and wrote about what interested me most. Grief, or more specifically, ghosts. A most personal subject, I oared on, racing now through the light toward the encroaching darkness. The last thing I wanted was to be stuck out here in the dark, even if this was the season of expanding sunlight. Placing a flashlight on wild darkness is akin to dipping an aquarium skimmer into the ocean, which is to say, futile. I weaved the canoe through slick river boulders, which dotted the narrows like engorged tumors. They reminded me of the boulder shrine I had visited a few weeks before, far from the trailhead. 2 hikers had been murdered near a rest stop many years before, and thereafter fellow trailblazers had taken to sliding the largest glacial rocks they could to the location of the savagery, a can-shaped offering of grief. I had wandered out there, hiking 7 miles each way, following faded blazes, to spend an hour kneeling before the rocks and offering up, what? Second-hand sorrow. Grief for grief's sake. An ear, for the murderer had long since been taken into custody. I couldn't really say, and what did I return with? Photographs, fresh copy for my blog, one of the smaller rocks secreted away in my day bag. That was all, for whatever remained of those hikers did not wish to commune, as was often the case with violent ends. The spirits get shy, withdrawn, distrusting. If anything, the spirits are more distrustful of strangers than those who still breathe. If anything, the dead are far more shy than the living. They know better. The roadway shrines I often frequented were far easier to access, and yet I always preferred the departed, who proved laborious to greet. The spirits can get lonely, too, and sometimes that opens them up. The tiny hillside cross, overlooking a vista of shrinking farmland, the somehow always fresh-cut flowers ringed around a memorial stone draped upon a river island, and descansos like the one I pursued today, thrusting out of river silt like tiny lunar flags of insistent personhood. Here someone's journey had ended. Here someone, by choice or by circumstance, had come to rest, and he, or she, or they were loved and greatly missed. Or so the monuments would suggest so. There I was, 47 years old, growing chubby, about the stomach, as many men do in the throes of middle age, wiping persistent sweat from behind my still thick, albeit greying hair. As I did so, my loose professor-like glasses slid down my nose like dew on a window. I considered myself no mere taphophile, no ordinary tombstone tourist, even if that was the subtitle of my blog. No, surely I was something far more concrete, a keeper of the light, a local historian of the microgenus, following the reaper's threads throughout its boundless grounds, keeping account of the vigil that pulsed always, always, as though the terrain itself were fronds of some cosmic baby light bright, that silly toy my daughter Paige used to play with as a child. as I myself had decades before in my own adolescence. I pushed the thought of Paige from my mind. The distance between us was too much to bear. It was not something one should consider in a place of such primitive solitude. We are all living ghosts, more than capable of spooking ourselves, let alone others. The water now turned a dense, inky black, and I pushed the canoe forward through an onslaught of back spasms and self-pity. Battling the water's resistance, not half so much as myself, the river grew ever more stagnant. A world embalmed by pain. Along the embankments, weedy trees twisted and curled around each other as though each were pairs of craning, bicephalous necks. For perhaps an hour now, I had not encountered a living thing, aside from the greenhead flies and the turtles and the ever-hungry mosquitoes, for which even my permethrin-treated clothing provided little relief. I was an experienced navigator of the backcountry, but the hour grew late. The sun crept forward in its dying light. If I could not locate the shrine soon, I would have to turn around and retreat home to blog about another failure. To locate, notwithstanding my recent trip to Appalachia, there had been a rash of such misfires lately, and though my readership was small, perhaps even non-existent outside the realm of webbots and spiders, the thought of letting others down, a persistent habit these last few years, seemed too much to bear. It felt anti-journalistic enough that I kept my most shocking secret from my readers, that at certain shrines I could speak with the dead as surely as you could your neighbor over a fence. If only I had set out first thing that morning, as intended, with eyes as clear as a spring sky. Instead of closing out the local dive again, instead of waking at noon with that familiar bitter stench and throbbing headache and a cacophony of anxieties. So it had been these past few years, each mistake building on the next like a misplayed hand of bridge. I now felt the heavy weight of time, first my career as a print journalist grown obsolete, then my family gone, disbanded, now me becoming so, just another endangered species, unable to evolve with the times. Hadn't that been my wife Rachel's chief complaint? And there was no dignity in it. Soon, with or without a shrine, I would find himself just another victim of this calamity known as physical existence. And then I could be shy or lonely, assuming there were others with the gift at all. A question that remained unanswered at the time. The sun was going down, it seemed, ever so fast. Garlands rested in a heap along the stern seat of the canoe. I thought himself then no mere interloper to the Danse Macabre. I brought with me offerings, always, as though each departed soul possessed within them a spirit of divinity. No, as though each roadside gravesite or trail-blazoned cross housed the spirit of some diminutive minigod. And, I might admit, after a sufficient number of pints, perhaps that wasn't so far off, for I am not traditionally religious, not after all I had lately endured, but any remnants of spirituality I did experience, always of the transcendental variety, now invariably occurred out of doors. Each of us carry a lingering spirit, one that even transcends death. This I well understood, but whether that meant anything about a higher power or powers, I could not say. All I knew was that if there was a heaven or a hell, the departed I spoke with hadn't made that journey. They were here, stuck, and despite the air in my own lungs, I well recognized the feeling. I poked beneath my second-hand life vest and withdrew from my jacket pocket the small double-sided map I had printed, laminated in thin, smudged plastic. The laminator, something I had gifted Rachel one Christmas when she was in a crafting and foiling phase. A clearly denoted X marked the supposed place of the shrine, an island that split the middle of the river, near the place where my canoe now rested, though no island was visible. Perhaps the tip I'd received was false. It wouldn't be the first time, and in my former career I was all too used to false leads. But I thought it odd that not only was there no shrine here, but no island, no geography that matched the map whatsoever. It felt as though I now breathed within the swirling of pixels, not unlike a video game, some aquatic void of disintegrating memory. And then I saw the corpse, at first more a foreboding instinct than any conscious thought, then with sickly clarity, a body bobbing in the reeds along the embankment, bloated, tangled with the vegetation, drained of all life. I pulled at my eyelids, as though the horror I now encountered may be but a kaleidoscopic image. I could shake and reform into something less grotesque, a riverside rhododendron bush, perhaps a hollow log. Surely the body was something imagined, a hallucination, a visual lie. No, a simple figment of the imagination I had always been told was overactive. The imagination my parents and teachers tried to silence with Ritalin, which I later snorted before my big exams in college. I pried the oars against the metal of my canoe and turned myself to better face the corpse, which remained with all the stubborn reality of a pop quiz for what felt like an eternity, but may have been no more than a minute. My mind raced, struggling with just how, exactly, to proceed. I wished more than anything else to steel myself against this dead body, this unfortunate fact, but how? Finally, I settled on removing my cell phone from its plastic wrapping. But of course, there was no signal out there, hadn't been since the time I had parked. I was smack dab in the middle of nowhere. I had lived in or around this stretch of wilderness my entire life. Yet even before this fateful night, the night that would change everything for me once again, just as surely as Rachel's disappearance had first changed everything nearly 3 years before, I had known only a deep unease and foreboding each time I entered that tick-strewn wilderness. I had been to other remote places, to Baxter State Park in Maine, to national parks dotting the west coast, and even to Alaska. I had, even in my 20s, section hiked the northern half of the Appalachian Trail. I had backpacked and camped out alone in total solitude, wishing. Away bears with glacier-rocked landscapes lit by pure, starlit skies of effervescent splendor. I had been awakened on at least 2 occasions by something or someone poking and prodding at the outside canvas of my tiny quarter-dome tent. But nothing else could compare to the mysteries and disquieting revelries of my own. Neighboring woods, my first concrete instinct unpalpable. My mind again raised with the electric shock of cascading decision trees, each one seemingly more untenable than the next. There was no standard advice, no self-help book guidance for how to proceed in this sort of thing. The uncovering of solitary death, even with all I had been through, even with all I had learned in those 47 bumpy years of consciousness, nothing even half prepared me for something like this. The sun fell behind the canopy of pine, and I shuddered, though not from the rapidly dropping temperature. Attempts to communicate with the body proved useless, as I knew they would. He could only communicate with souls, not physical remains. And souls could not speak in these sorts of conditions. There were rules to death, just as surely as there were rules in life. This body, this poor dead lump of meat, was an affront to both sets of rules. The sky turned a momentary blaze orange, the unnatural color of a hunting vest, then faded into a purplish repose. The wind leaped up from the stagnant water, carrying the smell of chrysanthemum and mud. I rowed forward until the corpse was portside to my canoe. The body's features were masculine, though the corpse face was so grotesque in its bloating I could not be certain of gender. An adult's face and body, but youthful somehow, despite its tight, grimacing features and acutely blue-tinged skin. The body faced toward me from the embankment, and its neck slumped upon its broad shoulders. The corpse's upper torso rested, arms splayed out on either side, as though it were a divined prawn. The lower half of the body, to the extent it had not yet dissolved, remained submerged below the detritus-strewn water. The body was wearing a Carhartt hooded jacket, limp brown hair clinging about the jawbone. Its eyes were closed, its lids, heavy and swollen, draped around the body, hung tight around its shoulders, hung a sign affixed to a silver necklace of chainmail. The letters affixed to the sign were cut from newspaper and magazine clippings, like how ransom notes are written in the movies. The sign was laminated, not unlike the map I had created for today's trip. I squinted through my glasses, as I'd long ago fallen behind on my vision prescription. At least there's a body this time, read the sign.